Welcoming Minnesota sports fans to another edition of Vikings on SI right here on the Bring Me the Sports YouTube channel. Jonathan Harrison here, joined once again by Will Ragatz and Joe Nelson. And boys, it's the bye week, so let's scrounge up some content here to discuss about the Minnesota Vikings. Will, you wrote about this earlier this week. Caller also wrote about this in his mailbag. And we, as Joe liked to say, we aggregated him a little bit over on Vikings on SI and wrote an entire article about some players that the Vikings should potentially trade for ahead of the November 5th trade deadline, I believe is the correct date, coming up next month. Vikings 5-0, so clearly things are going right, but still you would want to fill in some of the holes on the roster, Will. Let's jump in with you since you wrote the article earlier this week on the positions that the Vikings should potentially look at as we near the trade deadline.
Yeah, so there's four of them that stand out. I don't think the Vikings are going to trade for a wide receiver like I think somebody on NFL Network suggested they go after Amari Cooper. Like, they don't need that. But there are four positions, two on each side of the ball, that make sense if the Vikings and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah want to be kind of proactive and aggressive about adding to this 5-0 potential Super Bowl caliber team. On offense, it's running back, where we just saw Aaron Jones get a little banged up and the offense really come to a screeching halt without him. And then it's right guard, where Ed Ingram is still pretty clearly a weak link, not just on the offensive line, but on the roster as a whole, quite frankly. And then defensive tackle, it was their weakest position coming into the season, and they've been fine. Like, I think that journeyman trio of Jonathan Bullard, Jerry Tillery, Jihad Ward, those guys have exceeded expectations a little bit, but they're still kind of just fine. So potential impact player could be big there. And then the last one would be corner, where Byron Murphy, he had a good season last year, and the Vikings like him. He's part of their future perhaps, but he also leads all cornerbacks in coverage yards allowed, according to PFF, by a decent margin, and is tied for the most missed tackles among all cornerbacks in the NFL. So that's another one where you can't totally rule it out, because Murphy, free agent after this season. Stephon Gilmore, free agent after this season. Shaq Griffin, free agent after this season. I don't know that they would trade for somebody with multiple years of control, but if you're looking to nitpick and see where the Vikings could maybe get a little bit better, that corner position is another one that I don't think you can rule out.
Yeah, I think the conversation this year's changed a lot from years past, because typically you're like, okay, we need to stop the bleeding legitimately. And this year they're 5-0, and it's really about just adding as much depth and talent as you can to make a legit run at a Super Bowl. I mean, the NFC is as wide open as it's ever been. San Francisco's dealing with injuries. They look really good on Thursday night, but they're down to like their third or fourth running back. It's wide open, guys. Detroit's going to come in here after the bye week, and we'll get a real true test of what a real juggernaut looks like. And they can maybe say the same thing about the Vikings based on the way Minnesota's played. So
eventually the Vikings and Lions can get into Kirk Herbstreit's, Cowboys, Packers, Buccaneers tier.
Unbelievable. It just completely omits two of the best teams in the league. It's just crazy to me. Probably the two best teams in the NFC right now, if you ask me.
Yeah.
Philadelphia, if they have healthy wide receivers, I think they're right there in that conversation as well. But, it's almost a shame, because why is Byron Murphy Jr., giving up so many yards? And, the missed tackles are obvious. That's on him. But the reason he's giving up so many yards is because the Vikings are building big leads, and teams have to throw the ball. And Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin have been unbelievable. They're two of the top cornerbacks in the NFL when it comes to opposer passer ratings when throwing in their direction this season. So somebody's going to have to get eaten alive. And right now that's Byron Murphy Jr. And, he's had a couple of forced turnovers. He had two in that game against Green Bay, and they both came in clutch moments. So, it's almost like he's being scapegoated as the one guy who's maybe an issue in that position. But that's a really valuable place to be if you're the Vikings, when you're talking about trying to find weaknesses, and it's actually hard to do, And you mentioned the defensive line.
Yeah.
Guy like Jeffery Simmons out there, Matthew Collar just kind of spitballing names. He's got a 4-year, $94 million deal that he's in the first year of with the Tennessee Titans, and they might not want to trade him anyway. But even if you go get a guy like Jeffery Simmons, Well, according to PFF, we all know he's better than Jonathan Bullard overall, but Bullard's ranked ahead of him in overall defense. Simmons is a better run defender, But the metrics right now are just so positive for the Vikings that we're in this position where we have to kind of pick and choose unfairly guys who otherwise wouldn't be getting called out on a regular team.
Yeah, if I'm ranking those 4 positions that I just went through, I think corner would be pretty clearly last. They've got the 3 guys who have been solid. You've got, Fabian Moreau is a veteran who started a lot of games. We haven't even really seen him. He's there if needed. Caleb Evans, who's had some good moments over the last couple of years. He's there if needed. You got Mekhi Blackman coming back next year. So I don't know how much sense it would make to go after a rental unless somebody's going to get hurt, like somebody like Jonathan Jones or J.C. Horn with the Panthers is in the last year of his rookie contract. That would probably want to be something where if you're going to trade for him, you have plans to keep him long term. I think the other 3, the running back, D tackle, and right guard are a little bit more interesting. And I don't think ultimately that the Vikings are going to make some big swing at this deadline. The main reason for that being, guess what? They have a first-round pick next year and 2 fifths, and they're probably going to get a third-round comp pick for Kirk Cousins. Well, they definitely are. But that's it. You don't have a big stable of picks that you can move. So as much as you want to add to this roster, I think they like a lot of what they have already, and they don't want to totally go full Rams like we've said before, especially knowing that the J.J. McCarthy window is coming up here starting next year.
Couldn't you make the case, though, since you don't have a whole lot of draft capital to begin with, and if the season goes as well as it has started, if it continues to go that well, you're not going to have anywhere higher than a top 25 pick. And we mentioned earlier this week, this isn't a very deep draft. Like, there's a couple guys at the top, but after that, it's just kind of, it's not as deep as the previous couple drafts have been. Couldn't you make the case that you'd rather spend that first round pick, if it's especially if it's lower than a top 25 pick, on a proven talent who you know can play at this NFL level?
I think you can make that argument. Yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. And the Vikings,
especially if your window is going to open up a little bit more with J.J. McCarthy coming in next year.
Yeah, I think the argument for that is, we're talking about 2 different things sometimes here, where it's, are we trading for a rental for this year who's a pending free agent who then we might not be able to keep? And that's fine. They're 5-0. Like, they've never won a Super Bowl. Like, you should be at least exploring every option to maximize your ceiling this season. But I think you could also argue about trading for somebody like a Jeffery Simmons, in theory, who is already on a big multi-year contract, because you have the cap space to fit that in with McCarthy. Like, you can go both ways on that, where maybe you should keep some draft picks to load up on the young core around McCarthy, or maybe you should capitalize on McCarthy's rookie contract and go get some highly paid studs, which they're probably going to do in free agency next year anyways. I think Jeffery Simmons is a great player. He's off to a little bit of a slow start, but that dude's a beast. He's not quite like Dexter Lawrence, who is another name that, Vikings fans have brought up a little bit. I don't think that's happening. But, yeah, Jonathan, you can definitely make that argument that the Vikings should be looking at those picks as assets to help them get kind of win-now talent.
Dexter Lawrence that's a fascinating one, and obviously it's a pipe
He's so
dream,
good.
but like, we have to put this in perspective. I've even heard 2 first-round picks, right? Like, would you give up 2 first? I don't know that the Giants would do that. This is Aaron Donald-like dominance. Mm-hmm. He rushes the passer from the interior
as a nose tackle.
You go look at the leaders in quarterback hurries. He's right there. He's right there. That's a category reserved for Nick Bosa and Danielle Hunter. And this guy's in the middle, eating people alive. It would be Garrett Bradbury's dream come true if he never had to block that man again. Same with
except in training camp. Yeah.
Well, yeah. His training camps and practices would be nightmares. It would suck, But maybe they could have a handshake agreement. He goes 50%, so it's even. I don't know, but I just don't see how there's any way possible that you can get a guy of that caliber. And with the contract that Tennessee has with Jeffery Simmons, Maybe a first-round pick would get that done. Maybe, right? Because they could say, okay, well, we're not ready to win right now. We can get a first-round pick and shed all of this salary and kind of reset. But still, they just signed that guy. You would think that the front office says this is a key piece to our puzzle going forward. And they've got Will Levis. They know they've got some issues at quarterback and their wide receiver core. They've got needs all over the place. I don't know. But if you're Minnesota, that first-round pick, Jonathan, I think you're right on the money. It'd be nice to have, but you've got so much cap space in your window to win is right now. You have one of the older rosters in the NFL technically. You need to go out. You don't make this trade just for this year. If you can get J.C. Horn, who's 24 years old, for a first-round pick and know that you're going to lock him up long-term, there's no guarantee Stephon Gilmore's coming back next year or Shaq Griffin. I mean, your cornerback depth is immediately awash after this season. Mm-hmm. You need to go get cornerbacks, and you can do that in free agency, but you can control your destiny and get a guy of your choice if a team like Carolina is willing to deal Horn.
Yeah, and I think
their cornerback room next year is Mekhi Blackman and Dwight McGlothern, basically. I mean,
not great.
Caleb Evans, I think he has one more year. He was in that 22 class, but
feels like that experiment's done.
Well, yeah, he's your cornerback 5 or 6 right now. So, yeah, that's you're right. That's an interesting spot.
I think importantly for the Vikings also, when you're looking at this kind of conversation, is that we talked about all last offseason about the amount of cap space they would have in 2025. Well, they've already locked up their 2 biggest stars that they were looking at in Justin Jefferson and Christian Darrisaw. They already locked those guys up, and so now it's just filling around the edges as well to add to that. And I think for me, as a guy who's played Madden for a number of years, I would use that first-round pick in this moment in your timeline and go get a guy who's experienced and can play at this level instead of taking a bet on a first-round pick guy late in the first round. All right, so we've already mentioned a couple of these names: Dexter Lawrence, J.C. Horn. Who are some of the other guys, especially at running back, where you might be looking to fill in if Aaron Jones is out for some significant time here? Who are some of these other names that Vikings fans should keep their eye on, potentially being on the trade market and in the crosshairs of the Vikings coming up here in the next month?
Yeah, at running back, I mean, I think you need to go out and get some depth, even if Aaron Jones can play against the Lions.
Yeah.
And I think there's a chance he can't, given that he was considered week to week. Maybe they even give him Lions and Rams off and try to focus on getting him ready for that Colts game in week 9, which gives him a ton of time to get that hip right. But even if he does play in week 7, I just think you want another back in there. And I know they saw some good things from Ty Chandler last year, but if Jones is hurt, it's Chandler and Myles Gaskin, and there's nobody else on the roster right now. So I would be looking to go out, and I don't think that they're going to make some big splashy move at running back. That just doesn't feel like, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's MO to trade for some star running back on a bad team and give him a multi-year deal and all that. They've still got Aaron Jones as their number 1 guy if he's healthy. But I think going after somebody who's a solid, proven depth back who isn't maybe playing a lot on their current team could make sense. A couple names that I wrote in that article were, Dameon Pierce with the Texans, he's been injured this year as well, so that's a risk. But they've got Joe Mixon and Cam Akers there. You could go after Deontay Foreman with the Browns. Nick Chubb's coming back soon. They've got Jerome Ford. Miles Sanders isn't playing at all in Carolina behind Chuba Hubbard, and they've got Jonathan Brooks, the rookie, coming off IR. Khalil Herbert isn't playing very much in Chicago. Guys like that who we've seen play the position at a decent level in the NFL, but are for whatever reason not getting a lot of run on their current teams. They could probably be had for a pretty reasonable price.
Yeah, the Ty Chandler thing's really interesting. He was so explosive in week 2 against San Francisco, and he's done nothing other than that. Literally done nothing. And he had that.
To be fair to him, he had 2 big runs taken off the board for some nefarious penalties in London. So his numbers would have looked significantly better had those procedural penalties not happened. But
yeah, no, that's true. That's a really good point, actually. But overall, I mean, the guy's averaging 3.5 yards per carry on the runs that count. And that includes a 10-carry, 82-yard game against the 49ers, which tells you he's done very little on plays that matter outside of those 10 totes against the 49ers. Gaskin is, he's a nice little scat back to come in there and fill some void, but you're right, Will. You have to go out and find somebody who's able to handle more of a workload. Running the ball is going to get more important as this season goes on. You just know that's going to be the case. They haven't been able to run the ball even with leads unless Aaron Jones is in the game. Mm-hmm. And you're just not in a position right now where you can say Ty Chandler's a guy you're going to trust going forward. Detroit's stout against the run. The Rams, I don't know what their defense is like against the run, but that's not going to be easy. I would not throw Aaron Jones out there and risk him going down for like the rest of the regular season with some hip pointer that's just super severe. You got to find some depth right there. You cannot go out and trade for somebody who's going to cost you a lot of money. Not now in draft capital and not in the future in contract. That's why a guy like Tony Pollard, his name keeps getting brought up, but he's got with Tennessee $8.5 million cap hit next season and then a $9.25 million cap hit in 2026 when he's 29 years old. I want nothing to do with that, but the Vikings certainly do have to make a move there to find some depth if Aaron Jones isn't right.
Yeah, the issue is you might want a running back. You might want to trade for a running back today or on Monday or something if right. You're not going to have Jones against the Lions, but it's still almost a month until the deadline. Teams that are 2-3 are still going to be like, hey, maybe we want to keep this guy. We might turn it around. So that can be tricky. I feel like the action really starts to get going on like November 4th, the day before the deadline, and the Vikings kind of need some running back depth right now. Be nice if they still had Cam Akers, for example, but they don't. So I do think, that they need to look at going out to add another running back.
Yeah, and you're not going to trade that first-round pick for a running back, and we've seen their value.
Maybe a 5th or a 2026 7th, or I don't know.
What about right guard? What are the possibilities out there for potentially replacing Ed Ingram, who just continues to have bad game after bad game? Yes, Green Bay was a little bit of an uptick, but it just feels like there's been a lot of bad games from him this season. It feels like there's not been the improvement you would want to see out of a third-year right guard. What are the possibilities there on the trade market, if there is any?
Yeah, there's 69 guards, who have played at least 100 snaps this season. Well, this was before Thursday Night Football, but Ed Ingram ranks 67th in pass blocking grade, 29.4. Like it's rough. He's up there in pressures allowed, sacks allowed. You're right that the Green Bay game, we were like, oh, that was a little better. And then the London game was just more of what we've seen a lot of from Ed Ingram, which was not picking up stunts, losing one-on-one matchups in pass protection. It's just, I know the Vikings like his run blocking. I know they want the continuity on the offensive line. They've had these same 5 starters for a couple years now. But at some point, you can't just keep trotting them out there and letting this happen with what Darnold, with how Darnold can be affected by interior pressure. So I named potential ideas at the other positions at running back, DT, corner. I don't know who's out there in right guard that you could trade for, unless
not a lot of teams are trading.
Unless
their
it's a big
linemen.
name a big name like Brandon Sheriff or something, who I think
Right.
Collar mentioned. But I have no idea. I don't even know what team Brandon Sheriff's on right now.
He's with Jacksonville. He's starting at right guard, and he's allowed five pressures all year. So yeah, he'd be
that's pretty good. Okay, so the Jags are bad. Maybe that's a possibility, but that would be a big move.
What are you giving up to get him though?
He's 32. You're not going to give up a first-round pick for him, right? No, because that's crazy. He's 32. He turns 33 the day after Christmas, I think. I mean, he's got 10 years on those wheels, so his end is probably near.
One thing that's part of this is that Dalton Reisner is an option here, and I think that the picture would be a little different if he didn't exist and it was just Ed Ingram or I don't know, Dan Feeney as your options at right guard. Like Reisner, for his faults, he's not a great run blocker, but he brings a much higher floor in pass protection, which we saw last year. So like they don't have to make a move at right guard because of the Reisner possibility, but also he's got a back injury that can be tricky. Like if you could go get somebody that would be better than both Ingram and Reisner, like a Brandon Sheriff, that would be the ideal world. But it comes down to how much that would cost, of course.
Well, and here's an idea. I mean, I don't know how likely this is to happen. Probably 5% chance, right? But Kevin O'Connell has said he loves rookie Walter Rouse at tackle and guard, and he just wasn't willing to throw him in there at guard, to start his career. But, we're getting 5-6 weeks into the season here. What if he's been working extensively in practice at guard as a backup plan if Ingram or Reisner don't work out? I mean, the guy's a monster. He's a huge human being.
Yes.
You could stick him in there at right guard, and he would look bigger than Ed Ingram, and maybe it would work out. But then again, you're putting a lot of pressure on a rookie to step in there and go up against some of the biggest beasts this world has to offer. I think it's a dangerous thing, but I wouldn't mind seeing them at least give it a try.
If they had Rouse and Blake Brandel as their two guards, that might be the tallest guard duo in league history, because those
giants.
guys are
Yes.
both giants, both like tackle-sized players, originally tackles.
Yeah.
But I don't hate the idea. Walter Rouse, he might just get in there and do better than Ed Ingram.
He looked great.
It's not really a low bar or high bar to clear, though.
It's not, but it is a bar, I will say.
Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
Sometimes I see Vikings fans in my Twitter mentions saying, "Oh, it can't get worse." Brother, I watched Drew Samia play. I watched Dakota Dozier play. It can get worse.
You know what? Nothing's worse than Ryan Cook. The years of Ryan Cook at guard. I mean, my metabolic age went from like when I was in my early 20s, it skyrocketed into the 60s and 70s. That's what my metabolic age was watching Ryan Cook play right guard. I was at risk of a severe cardiac arrest.
Okay, I had to Google him. That was 2007 and 2008. I that was my childhood, but I wasn't totally locked in on who the right guard
my
was.
God. I was like 25 or something like that.
Was he playing tackle?
No, he was a guard, I believe.
Okay.
Ryan Cook. I think that's
No
his
idea.
name.
You look that up. I'll start the outro because we got to get going here. Good talking to you guys. We're on the Ryan Cook segment, so at this point we're clearly out of ideas here to continue this conversation. So we'll end it here. We'll continue covering everything Minnesota Vikings and Minnesota sports over on Vikings, Twins, Timberwolves, Gophers, and as well as Badgers on SI. Go read Joe and Will's work over there. Will, I know you've got a ranking article coming out later today that I'm sure will be controversial because all rankings are as usual. And boys, we'll talk to you later. And Minnesota sports fans, hit subscribe on the channel here. It does help us get found. Also notifies you every time we post a new Minnesota sports video. We'll talk to you later.